Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Awesome. How are you guys doing? I'm so excited to be here. This is my first time in Australia. I flew from New York City to be here. And in the U.S., the only thing they told me about Australia was that you guys have some kangaroos, maybe. And I'm really hoping to meet one. And I don't know where to find them, but yesterday during the opening party, someone told me where I can find a kangaroo burger, which I guess is close enough. But my favorite part about coming here has been stepping outside, stepping onto the street, and smelling literally flowers. That is amazing. Anyone visited New York City? Yeah? So we have different flavors of pee. That's what we have. So you all are totally winning. But I'm really looking forward to after the conference when I get to take beach selfies and tweet them to everyone in New York and make them really angry, because that's what Twitter is for. But before we do that, we're going to talk about Code Club. So 2 years ago, I was this chick. I worked at startups. I did things that were non-technical. So I've done business development, I've done sales, some design stuff, and I worked alongside developers, and I worked next to the technical people, but I wasn't really one of them, and I really wanted to be. And I found myself always peeping over at what they did, and I felt like what they did was so much cooler than what I could do, and I really wanted to be part of that group. I wanted to make an impact at the company that I worked at. So I decided to learn to code. I taught myself how to code for a couple months, did Treehouse, Code School. One of my favorite resources was Chris Pine's Learning to Program, which is still one of my favorite resources. And I did everything I could, spending 12 hours a day learning. And then finally I decided to go to a boot camp, applied, got accepted. And when I graduated, I was so proud. I was so proud of all the awesome code stuff that I had conquered. And then I got a job. And then I realized that there's all the code stuff I don't know, the stuff I don't know, the stuff that I thought I knew, but then I tried to actually use it or explain it and had no idea what I was talking about. And then there's all the stuff that I forgot about because I only learned it once and didn't think it was important, and now it's coming up to bite me in the butt. And by the way, this changes all the time, so welcome to programming. Has anyone heard of the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition? Show of hands? A couple of you? Awesome. So this model says that when I am trying to get new skills, I have to go through these 5 phases. I start as a novice, I move to the advanced beginner, then I'm competent, then proficient, then an expert. And when I started actually working, I realized, very painfully, how much of a novice I really was. And I don't think anybody here wants to be a novice, right? We all want to be experts. We want to be those people with the badass glasses and the cape. That's what I wanted to be. So I asked the TAs and the senior developers and the great people that I knew who knew how to code, and I said, how can I do that? How can I go from novice to expert as quickly as possible? And they said you should read code. Has anyone gotten this advice before? Show of hands, a couple of you. So they said you should read code, and I said, okay. So I gathered my developer friends, and I said, hey, we're going to read some code together. So for 1 hour every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we got together and we decided that we were going to read code in hopes that we would go from novices to experts. Now, the first step in gathering a team of developers together to do anything is you have to pick a group name. So we decided that our group name was going to be Code Club, because we're creative geniuses. The next thing we had to do is we had to pick something to read. So I went back to those experts and I said, we're taking your advice. We got the group name, we're ready to go. But what should we read? And they said, anything. That's not helpful. Don't do that. And if someone asks you, where do I start? I'm about to do this epic thing. What do I do? Don't say you can start anywhere. That's not good advice. So we decided to determine some guidelines. We decided that the code base that we would read needed to be exemplary. Well, what does exemplary mean? I will tell you. It means that it needed to be popular, right? Some good stars on GitHub is nice. It needs to be well documented. And this one was important because as novices, we were worried that we wouldn't be able to understand and read this code, and we wanted to have something to refer to. We wanted it to be well written. And this one is very interesting because as novices, how would we know what it means to be well written? But we thought we should put that in there anyway. And lastly, it should be well maintained, something that was updated, something that was current. And we believed that if we read and studied this exemplary code for 1 hour each week, we would go from novices to badass experts. So we started by looking at Sinatra. So Sinatra was the first framework that we learned about in school, and it was the framework that we learned before learning Rails. and it's a DSL for quickly creating web applications in Ruby with minimal effort. And we knew how to use it, but we didn't really understand how it worked. So we decided to start with the get method. And we got together on Hangout, and we were super pumped and excited, and we said in 1 hour, we can understand what this method does and how it works. And then we tried reading it, and then it took us from one method to another thing, to some things we didn't see before, and then we were crossing over to different files, and we went from very excited to incredibly overwhelmed in a very short period of time. So we decided to do a retro. Do you all do retros at work? Or in life? Life retros are good too. I do them every Friday with my husband. So my favorite part of a retro is you get to sit back, and you get to really examine what you did and what you liked about it. So after that 1 hour, we asked a couple questions. We asked, how was the experience? What did we learn? What did we learn as a group, but what did we learn as individual people? And how can we improve? When we do this again the following week, what should we do differently to make sure we learn even more? And we had a couple takeaways from this. One, we realized that it was very important to pick a manageable code base. That get method and looking at Sinatra was just a little too big to really dissect and get into in 1 hour. So for us, we picked an arbitrary number. We said the next code base we read is going to be no bigger than 100 lines of code. And this was completely arbitrary, but it ended up being a really good number and allowed us to do a couple things. It means that we had time to ask questions. We didn't feel bad when we wanted to stop and ask questions and have a conversation because we knew that we had the time to do it. It allowed us to try things. Oftentimes, we'd download it locally, and we'd open up IRB and try out the methods and see how things worked, and it was a really great interactive point. And then 3, it allowed us to research topics. Whenever we saw a method or a library or something we hadn't recognized before, we knew that we had the time to pause, do a little bit of searching, read some blog posts, and then come back to the conversation. And we realized that the real value of this exercise was not reading the code itself. It was the digressions. And this, to me, was very big, because I'm the kind of person, when I go into a meeting, I like to have an agenda. It has these 3 points. We're going to get through it as quickly as possible, and then we're out. So for me, I had to appreciate the fact that these distractions were actually the main benefit of having these sessions, that those off-ramps that we go off on are actually very valuable. And 3, it was important to remember that it was a team effort, meaning that everyone on the team had to participate and make sure that they were included. And a big part of making sure it's a team effort is having a tour guide. So what we decided to do moving forward is we were going to switch that role of a tour guide week over week. And that tour guide is not the expert. They're not the person teaching. They're not the person that has all the answers. They're the person making sure that the group is on track and everyone is happy. They're the person who says, Dan, you've been a little bit quiet. Do you understand this and this? Do you have any questions? Stephanie, that was a really great suggestion. Let's try this over here. It's the person making sure that everything is going well. So the first few weeks were awesome, and then we ran out of exemplary code. So, out of necessity, we had to read some bad code. And when we did that, Dan one day said, this method sucks. How would we write it? And he gave us our very first moment of interaction. In that question, he gave us permission, he gave us an excuse to dive into the code base and put ourselves in the shoes of the developer. And we asked a couple questions. We asked ourselves, well, what's the intent of this method? Why was it written this particular way? And how did it fit into the overall design of the code base? And having that moment of interaction was very helpful. And it taught us that it doesn't have to be exemplary to be good. Bad code is really good learning code. And the other thing that happens when you read bad code is you give yourself permission to critique it. It's really hard to have opinions, especially as a beginner, when the code is written by some incredible Rails core contributor person who you think is absolutely amazing. That's really intimidating. But if you know that the code is written by a peer or someone who doesn't have such a big name, it's pretty easy to break it down and allows you to engage with the code base on a different level. So exemplary code, we threw that out the window. So everything was going great again. And then one day we were reading some code that involved rack, and Dan said, guys, I don't think I really understand how rack middleware works. And we thought, Dan, that's easy. We'll explain it to you. And then we realized that we didn't know how rack middleware worked either. So in asking that question, he helped us identify a knowledge gap. So the next week, instead of reading code, what we decided to do was to do some research on Rack middleware. We pulled up some videos and blog posts, shared them ahead of time, and we shared that knowledge in that 1 hour. So this is a really good way for us to find these knowledge gaps and fill them together. Everything was going great again, and then came the OmniAuth meetup gem. This is a gem that I had to use for work on a project, and the documentation was okay. I was able to figure it out, but I really wanted to understand how it worked and what it did. So I said, guys, let's make this one of the code bases we read together. And when we did that, it really changed the experience for me, because all of a sudden, I had a relevant code base. I had a code base that I was really excited about because it applied to my life, because I was using it at work. So from that point on, we tried to find code bases that were relevant, that had to do with a side project we worked on, that covered a topic or an issue that we were passionate about, and that way, it really engaged us on a different level. So we realized that over time, we developed a set of guidelines. And these were the guidelines, that it's important to pick a manageable code base. And for us, that was 100 lines of code. For you, it might be something bigger or smaller. That the learning really happens in the digressions, and these conversations were something to embrace and not necessarily run away from. That it's a team effort, and it's important that everyone feels included, even those quiet people who want to be lurkers. You cannot be a lurker in my code club. I will bring you in. 4, that it's important to have a tour guide and to change that role week over week so everyone gets a chance to be the person pulling everyone else in. That interacting with the code is a really important part of the learning process. That it doesn't have to be good. Bad code is awesome. That knowledge gaps are really, really great and really an opportunity to fill them in when you do these code clubs. And 8, that finding relevant code bases can really enhance the experience. So we did this for a while, and I decided that I wanted to try something new. I decided that I didn't want to just read code, and I didn't want to do it with people I knew. So back to when I first learned to code. I looked like this, kind of like I look now. So I was a cartoon, and then I learned to code, and now I'm a human. But it was tiring and lonely and frustrating. It was 12 hours of just me and the computer is always right. And then when I got to boot camp, all of a sudden I had friends. I had a community of people who understood exactly what I was going through. They were happy with me when things worked, and they cried with me when they didn't work. And having this community really changed the experience. But it came with a price tag. For me, it cost $11,000 US, and many months without a salary, which is a pretty big price for a community. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that in order to find these people, you kind of had to pay this amount. So I started a Twitter chat called Code Newbie. Show of hands if you know what a Twitter chat is. Show of hands, raise them high, raise them proud. Okay, I get to tell you all about it. So a Twitter chat is when you pick a hashtag. For us, it was hashtag Code Newbie, and we pick a time. So for us, it's 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. And I would tweet out questions. And it would be questions like, what are you learning this week? Where are you stuck? What are some things you're really excited about? And really, it was just an excuse for people to talk to each other. And I thought I would do this for a couple weeks, a couple months. But today is actually our 2-year anniversary. We've done over 100 Twitter chats at this point. Thank you. And what I ended up with was an incredibly inclusive and welcoming community of people all over the world who were learning to code and who were really passionate about helping each other learn. And we grew from just a Twitter chat to having an online forum. I think our Slack community has almost 3,000 members at this point. We have a weekly podcast. We've done 74 episodes. We have a blog. We have a couple in-person meetups. But I wanted to do something more. I wanted to do something that directly impacted people's learning. So what if we took this idea of Code Club and we combined it with Code Newbie? What would happen then? And what if we didn't just read code, but we looked at blog posts and tutorials and videos and book chapters, and we used all the different resources. I'm going to keep doing that. I don't know what's going to happen. And we used all the different resources that we had at our disposal to learn. So I put up this project online where anybody could start a session. Anybody could start an online 1-hour session, and 3 people could sign up. So small teams, and there would be a specific activity, a specific goal that you'd be working towards during that 1 hour. And in a couple months, we ended up having over 50 code club sessions. Now, the thing is, with these code club sessions, I was now on the outside. I didn't know if they were working. I didn't know if they were a good idea. I didn't know if people were learning. So to find that out, I had to talk to users and do a ton of customer interviews. And I think I interviewed just about every single person who did one of the code club sessions. And I came out with a couple takeaways. Number one, a manageable activity is crucial. About half the groups actually finished the activity they tried to do, and the other half didn't quite make it. And the ones who did felt very fulfilled and very excited and very passionate, and the ones who had 15% left and had to kind of go home and finish it, they just didn't feel as fulfilled as the other ones did. The second one is that calling people out really worked. So when you start a session online, I send you a little email that says, make sure to engage people, make sure to pull people in. If you see somebody who's being a little quiet, you call them out and you make sure that they talk. And I was kind of nervous about this because I know that there's some people who are introverts and people who just want to sit back and observe. And it was really important that they engage. And so when I talked to these people and said, what was it like for you when your tour guide basically made you talk? And they said that I'm really glad that the tour guide did that because I got a lot more out of it by speaking and contributing than I would have if I had just sat back as I planned on doing and just observed. And this, to me, was the most interesting takeaway, the fact that broken activities worked. So about a handful of the activities that they tried to do were missing links, or were outdated, or missing different steps along the way. And I was worried when I heard this, and I thought, man, that's going to be a disaster. But actually what happened was it forced the members to fill in the gaps on their own. It forced them to go out and find those broken links and to make up for them. And it really made them more active, and it made them learn a lot more along the way. Do these lessons look kind of familiar? Maybe a little bit? So number one, that manageable activity goes back to the whole manageable code base, right? That lesson still applied. Calling people out has to do with the tour guide playing that role, has to do with the importance of the team effort, and it has to do with the fact that interacting with the code and being a real part of it is a huge benefit and is a really important part of this experiment. And three, broken activities still work. That kind of sounds like bad code, right? Bad code is good code. It's an opportunity to learn. But there was a problem. The tour guide was a huge problem. When I interviewed all these people, I said, great, it sounds like you had a great time. Would you consider starting your own session with an activity that you get to pick? And almost everybody said no. And I said, but why not? You just told me you had a great time and you'd sign up. And they said, oh, I would totally sign up, but I'm too scared to start my own session. I don't want to be the teacher. And I had to explain to them, but you're not the teacher. You're the host of the party. You're making sure everyone has a good time. And they just didn't believe me. And there was this huge fear of being in the role of the expert and having to teach and have all the answers that really made this a huge problem. So we tried a different format. What if I chose the tour guide, and it was one consistent tour guide who showed up every week at the same time, and anybody could join and drop in whenever they wanted? So we did this, and we did this on a number of different formats. We did one for Ruby, for JavaScript, for Python, for AI, and for Clojure. That's our most recent one. And we had online sessions where I chose the tour guide, and I know these were people who were very community-oriented and good at pulling people in, and they lead 2-hour sessions once a week online. Now, there were some pretty big differences between this model and the one I described before this. One was it was pretty unpredictable attendance, right? If they're drop-ins, we have no idea if anyone's going to show up at all. Sometimes the hangout was too full, and other times there was, that is very interesting, there's a moth thing, okay. That's fine. And other times there was just 1 or 2 other people, so there was this unpredictability about the experience. And 2, each club had a long-term project. So instead of having these one-off, 1-hour-long activities, they had a whole code base they were working on over time. And they got together once a week to review pull requests, look at code together, and to debug and get unstuck on different features. And 3, the biggest difference is that there's one consistent tour guide that I picked. So we did Code Club 3 different ways. We did it with my developer friends, just my little circle of people, once a week. We did it where anybody can start a new session, and they can also sign up for a session. And we did one where there was one tour guide and anybody can drop in. And even with these differences, the 8 guidelines I outlined earlier still persisted. They were still very important. And what I learned is that these 8 rules still apply no matter what the format is. Because the guidelines weren't really about this concept of a code club. They were more for just social learning. That anytime we can get together and learn from each other, using these guidelines will help bring all of us up. So when I talk about Code Club and when I talk about the work that we do at Code Newbie, people automatically think education. They say, oh yeah, you're in ed tech. And that's not really what it's about. We're not solving an education problem. We're not solving a tech problem. We're solving a very old human problem, the fear of being alone. That feeling that you get, that I'm sure all of you have felt at some point in your coding journey, where you're looking up at this mountain and you don't know if you're going to make it. You know that other people have done it. You've seen them at the top. You've watched their videos. You've read their books. You've used their code. But you don't know if you're nearly half as good or as capable. And those demons of doubt are so exhausting. And they might be there because of where you come from or what you look like or the accolades your mother wished you had. But regardless of the reason, that mountain is terrifying. And it sure would be good if you had somebody to go with you. And that's really what this is all about. This is about having someone there to help you climb that mountain. Now, I worry that as we all become more technical and more knowledgeable, that we'll forget what that feels like. What it feels like to look up at that mountain. What it feels like to open up that code base for the first time and have no idea what's going on. To feel that cold panic. To be drenched with the shame of not knowing that we often mistake for stupidity. Now, I got this far in my journey, at least in part, because of a lot of really incredible people. A lot of you are in this room, and you know who you are, who helped me get there, who cared enough and saw my passion for code and my love for this community to help a lending hand. And I hope that you all do the same for all the code newbies climbing behind you. Thank you.